What are you afraid of? For me, it's death. That is pretty common amongst most people, though. When I am reminded of my imminent death, I like to think of the phrase carpe diem, the great quote said by the late Robin Williams in the movie Dead Poets Society. In the film, Williams discusses death and how his students are going to be worm food one day and how they must seize the day and make their lives extraordinary. It is a message that has stuck with me for quite some time, and I think it is also an especially important quote to think about in our current situation. Now, we might not have been in this situation before, but perhaps something similar. As someone who resides just outside of New York City, we would be a major target for any sort of terrorist attack, as we have been in the past, or any other sort of threat or breach of security. But we learn to live with this fact that something like this might just happen, but we aren't fearful of it. Now, let's discuss dealing with our fears and the psychological effects. Now, we have all heard the quote, do something every day that scares you, and let's talk about what happens when you do. One method, typically used in behavioral therapy, is called systematic desensitization. This is when a practitioner sits with a client/patient and teaches them various breathing exercises and relaxation techniques. Then the patient creates a fear hierarchy, starting with something related to the fear that causes the least amount of anxiety, such as thinking about a spider, for example. Then they move up to the most fear-provoking situations, such as holding the spider in their hands, once again, for example. They continue through all of these stages of stimuli whilst continuing these breathing exercises until they are actually comfortable with the fear itself, and they have conquered it. They have controlled their phobia and know how to relax themselves when feeling this anxiety. Now, typically, controlling our anxieties is something we can do on a daily basis with our fears, because they're fears and phobias for a reason. They are either not something that'll happen for a very long time or something that is quite out of the ordinary that probably won't happen ever. But why is this different? Our fears of the novel coronavirus are much more different than the fears of the 2002/2003 SARS outbreak. Now, what's interesting is that the SARS outbreak was the coronavirus, but it was just a different kind. Thank you to the Singapore Medical Journal for that. It was not shocking to researchers when we had our current COVID-19 outbreak, but public reactions to it have been quite different. Now, there are so many unanswered questions about what is happening, so I decided, let me take matters into my own hands, and conducted an interview with Jonathan Jenkins, who is the Chief Operating Officer at AC Disaster Consulting. For some background, Jenkins was Assistant Commissioner with the New York City Department of Emergency Management, beginning as a planner in 2006, and was appointed Assistant Commissioner in 2013. He has also held positions at the U.S. Senate Office of Security and Emergency Preparedness in Washington, D.C., as well as being an emergency management consultant for FEMA and a bioterrorism consultant for the U.S. Department of Defense. Now, I would like to say that my uncle knows a lot about emergency management, and that's what we're here to talk about as well. But before we get into what I discussed in our interview, I want to talk about what emergency management is exactly, because it's something that's thrown around a lot in the media, but we aren't really exactly sure of what it is. So, prior to 9/11, emergency management did exist, but it just wasn't taken as seriously as it has been post 9/11. Since then, it has been given quite a lot more funding and has grown quite a bit as well. It is somewhat different to law enforcement, though, as there is no set curriculum, but there is a sense of standardization across the United States. Overall, it is making sure that all parties are unified in response, planning, preparation, and mitigation. Now, on to what we talked about. So, first of all, we discussed the confusion people are having during this crisis due to fear-mongering on the news and just general confusion in the media. There is so much going on Twitter that we're all confused. This is something he said that they are trying to figure out, as he is currently uprooting his family, who reside in Arizona, to move to Florida for the time being, to work on not only the coronavirus situation, but how to plan for hurricane season with social distancing being involved. These two things being communicated will cause some confusion, so they have to figure out a new way of approach to streamline messages coming in. He also said that it is interesting because there are plans for pandemics, but what we're hearing in the media just isn't representative of the research that is being done. Next, we talked about why being prepared is important and how it can calm the fears people might have. Now, the first thing we talked about are FEMA lifelines, which are created to reframe incident information by using plain language which can be understood by anyone. Literally anyone. To promote unity of effort across all communities during incident response. These can be found at fema.gov/lifelines. Furthermore, we discussed how we have to see our pieces fitting together and how during times like this, we have to step back and see how we can prepare together. Any plan is emergency management, and we have to think about emergencies as in terms of vulnerability. You can be as prepared as possible, and something will still go wrong. With COVID, the messaging has made preparations different, but planning and preparing is a mindset to take care of fellow citizens. Finally, we ended our phone call talking about life after this and what it's going to look like. And no one is really sure, as this is something we haven't really just had happen before. But after all this is over, we should learn to not only help each other, but to love each other more. And now, you're probably wondering why I talked about emergency management, as it has nothing to do with the Latin phrase carpe diem, but I totally think that it does. The whole point of emergency management is being prepared and being aware of what can happen, but not letting that fear affect our lives. Surely, this situation is different, as we are living through a major historical event, and we are all dealing with fear, but once this is all over, I am not going to let the fear of a global pandemic stop me from living my life, or, honestly, the fear of anything for that matter. But since it's not over yet, I'd like to think of another quote that brings me peace in times of uncertainty. It is another quote that has stuck with me for years. If you're going through hell, keep going. We will get through this together.